The reason why people are not able to leave horrible toxic relationships is not because there is no way out. There is a code that exists in most countries. There's ability for most people to live independently because they're able to work independently, and most governments guarantee that. But most people don't do that, and most people choose to suffer in bad relationships, suffer in bad marriages, suffer in marital rape, suffer in domestic violence because they're very, very scared of leaving. They're very, very scared of leaving because the social stigma around leaving relationships is just very coercive. I wanted to note that the moment people think that they want to leave a relationship, and I wanted to note that this is a coercive force in your life because you're living with this person on a day-to-day basis, you're sharing a bed with them. At a point in time when they want to leave, they're not able to because people think you're a horrible person when you break relationships because religions tell you so. People think you're people characterize you as a slut. People characterize you as a horrible person at a point in time when you choose to leave these relationships. I think what I want you to note here is that people will ostracize you, will never let you part of your social groups, and this is the kind of world that we live in the status quo. How is our world different, and why is this going to be much more kinder to the people who are suffering from this? I want you to note that our world is going to be different because when they have stipulated period of time that you enter familial agreements in, you have to renegotiate your familial agreements at that stipulated period of time. So maybe when you enter, it depends on different times, right? Maybe a 20-year-old will enter with two-year contracts. Maybe when you're 30 and you want more stability and you've already done 3 to 2-year-old contracts, you maybe want to do a longer contract and things like that. But the point is, what happens in our world is that you have to renegotiate your familial contract after every period of time, which means people know that you have to renegotiate at a certain point, and a fair number of people leave. This does two things that are very, very unique and different to in our world. First, it forces people to talk about what they want and how is their life evolving and how is this relationship evolving and what do they want from their partner. This does not happen in status quo because what is the point of having this conversation? Because you're stuck with this person anyways. There is no real opt-out in most of status quo. So which means you don't really have this conversation. I'm quite sure how many of our parents had the conversation of should we ever stay together or not, because it's not really a choice. I think when you have the option of leaving, that is when you really have a conversation of what do I need from you to make this relationship better? What do I need to stay? But secondly, I want you to note that this normalizes leaving, and this happens because of 2-3 reasons. One is that the number of people who have the ability to a lot of people are leaving relationships, which means it becomes much more common to have more single 45-year-old women, more single 45-year-old men, which means you always believe that you can have a decent relationship irrespective of what part of your life you're in, because you believe that you can go and find what you want from someone and what someone else is offering to you, which means you believe that you can have a happy life because you're able to get these relationships, which means you're more likely to leave. But also the society from T equal to 0 is built around this, which means there is no stigma around it, which means there's probably going to be support structures that are built around it, right? This looks like things like matchmaking services. This looks like these are things that are probably going to be prevalent, and which means it's going to be more normalized and more people are willing to leave relationships. I want to do 3 things first. First, I want you to note why is this key and important for people, because I want you to note that people's preferences keep changing. Yes.
So is there a minimum of this relationship or a maximum? Is this contract can be renewed by time or not?
So I think it doesn't matter. It could be small contracts, big contracts based on what you want. But again, it's not important. You can obviously leave in between the contracts too. Like in status quo, you can leave a marriage in between too, technically. So both the things can exist. No court can order you to stay in a relationship that's basically slavery. Cool. I think what I want to do here is why people's preferences keep changing. I want you to note every year you go through new lived experiences, you form new beliefs, you form new opinions. It becomes an integral part of you and the person you are. I think it is not necessary that you have to emotionally and physically be in line with the partner that you joined in, because maybe 3 years down the line you're a completely different person, and 3 years down the line your partner is a completely different person. In status quo, you're forced to stay together because there is there is no real option for you to get out of it. But I think here you're able to realize the mistake that you made. You're able to realize how this relationship is evolving and you're able to get out of it. The impact of this is you're not forced to live with someone you're not comfortable with, and you could get the best possible relationship that you want, that makes you a better person, that adds to your life every step of the way till you die, which means more people are happier on our side. But more importantly, this has a huge impact on people's lives. And I want you to note is that when you get into relationships in status quo, the expectation or the requirement of relationship, and it keeps changing, is your phase of life constantly keeps changing. You might need more or less from your partner based on how your life evolves. So maybe after college, I don't need much from my partner, but if I decide to start a business and I want to move to a different state, I need my partner to move with me. And that has damning consequences for my partner, because they might not have access to the education that they want in the state that I have to move to. They might not have access to their friend groups, and have to leave everything and move with me in like only the reason to like stay with me. I think the point here is it okay for people to move? It's fine, but I think people should consent to it, and that consent is not ever existing in status quo. Only in our side you can always be like, you know what, I need to renegotiate whether you are willing to go ahead and do this with me, because the next 3 years of my life I want to do these things. Are you willing to commit to these things? Are you willing to do this with me, and things like that? Which means, insofar as this expectation is more clear to people, like people are not like letting go of their independence. The impact of this is twofold. I think the people who are affected most by this are disproportionately women, because in most developing countries, like in status quo is patriarchal society that existed, which means more women are the ones who are suffering the consequences of like not being independent, right? Because they're always the ones who are letting go of their jobs, who are letting go of their education, who are going and following their men because that's the expectation that was set onto them, and that is what they did. I think on our world, you're just more likely to like pursue what you want and live more individually happy life that satisfy your lives. But lastly, I want to note. I want you to note that people are more equipped to live more individually happy lives that like fulfills their own life things. And the reason for this is, from a very young age, you know that this could potentially be a situation where you need to be living alone, which means from a very young age, your parents are teaching you that, you know what, you need to know how to be alone and know how to live happily, and you need to know how to like get the best out of relationships. So there is no norm to go ahead and there's no norm to coexist. There is a emphasis on individuality and satisfying your desires individually, which means more people pursue what they want to do, and they're more equipped to live by themselves. That does not exist on their side. This is also important because this goes into the point of normalization of getting out, because people are not scared of getting out of the relationships. The moment they're bad, they're happy to get out of the relationships because they know they can be happy individually as well. And that is something that is only taught to the kids in our side of the world, because that's when like, the expectation on our world is this is something that you need to get ready for. The expectation on their world is most likely to get ready for marriage, and that's what the religions teach you, that's what the societal value teach you, and there's no expectation to be independent, there's always expectation to be coexisting. For all these reasons, propose.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech, opening the case for all leader. Thank you.
Judge, while you listen to my speech, you might think that I am just listing a bunch of negative cases. However, I want to note that this motion, this prefers motion where we have time-bound family formation, actually leads to much more abusive practices of this, and enabling the capacity for individual to do so is enough to create enough harms in society. Because just because they talk about, oh, people are not going to act that bad in the society, is not going to be an enough conclusion on their side, because currently, maybe we are good people who like to sustain good relationships because, I don't know, we're quite good people, we're due to wait, but there are many kinds of actors in today's society, giving people certain drugs and giving people, for example, access to do things like really sexual bad things. You know how many illicit things happen in today's world, which means that this likely is going to be used abusively by rich people, by people who have power, etc., etc. Then, I'm going to move on to what kind of negative things might happen. their initial status quo in which they started their debate was the idea that in the status quo, people are currently trapped in relationships that they do not like, and they cannot leave these relationships under this time-bound whatever. You have better ability to negotiate, whatnot. Why is then do we have the ability of like women being trapped in relationships? It is because power asymmetry currently exists in society, where certain people just do not have enough leverage to opt out of relationships. We think that there's far more likely in this contract, both in firstly getting the both sides to agree to of a certain term time degree. We think that it is going to side far more with the people who are more powerful, a time constraint or a time limit that they are more comfortable with, as opposed to people who are more vulnerable. Or when we're renewing contract, we're likely going to see the severance of contracts or the renewal of contracts more likely in the favor of those who are in power as opposed to those who are not. That is the exact premise that they rely their case on, and so it happens on our side too. Yes.
How is it different from divorce? Because divorce can also happen on our side. You can separate naturally on our side as well. It's going to be reasonably negotiated before the marriage starts or the contract starts.
I'll explain. First of all, how is this negative case, like how is this power asymmetry exist? First of all, we think that people who want to decide who to create family with, etc., get to decide largely, how long they want to have. If you want to trap your potential wife into a marriage for 40 years and you have a lot more money to persuade lawyers to sign this contract, or you have a lot more threat ability to be like, oh, I'm going to take away money from you if you do not agree with these terms, you have more ability to time trap people as opposed to in the status quo by agreeing to a contract that is bound for 30, 40 years as opposed to 10 years or 2 years, right? Which means that power dynamics likely plays into play as well. But secondly, we think that a lot of this plays in a game theoretic manner, which means that in this new preferred world, you know that the eventually that this time ticking happens, the contract ends and you will have to renew. At the point to which you renew, there are many things that happen. For example, if in a perfect happy best case scenario, both parties want to renew the relationship, sure, they will renew the relationship and that'll be fine. But in cases where one party feels that the other party may not agree with them, etc., you have far more time before the contract ends, because you know that there's an end date, to come up with evidences that might either threaten the other person or that might be more useful in court for you to sustain that negotiation with the other person. This, for example, looks like if you want to likely sever the marriage, you might be like, oh, this person is incredibly inept to be financially stable on its own, therefore we need to renew this contract, therefore to be together. Or if you really want to sever this contract, whereas the woman wants to stay with the man, you might be like, oh, this person is really bad, and create sexual recordings of this person and be like, this person was really coercive in that way, etc. Or it's a game theory, so you have more ability to contract different bad things about your previous partner to be able to sabotage the relationship in a way that is far more likely to happen. This evidence gathering is far more possible on the side who has more power, who have more resources, therefore leaving out the vulnerable from being able to actively make an autonomy choice of their own in the way that they prefer. But secondly, no thank you, I think this also creates a plethora of problems. I think when the couple is staying together for a long time, has a family, or their time has ended, now they're splitting, this creates many problems, such as how are you going to split your property, how are you going to split your mortgage, how are you going to split your child custody amongst people. These things are again going to be something that people prepare beforehand, because you know that there's an end date, which means that again the leverage goes to people who have more power and ability to contract this information. But finally, we think that what is incredibly bad is when you're husband and wife to another, you actually have access to each other's criminal records as well as medical records. We think that these crucial private information is also revealed by when you are together, and they're likely going to use as well when you are outside the marriage just as equally, or used in court to, for example, negotiate or lack of negotiate as well. Furthermore, why is this really bad? Because we think that this is also bad because they talk about how the social stigma of divorcing is likely going to decrease on their side. We think that this opposite is likely going to be more happening. So the idea is of essentially having a 2-year contract with a woman and severing that contract and having another 2-year contract with another woman, and doing that infinitely becomes more normalized in society, which means that essentially people like sugar mummies and sugar daddies have more ability and freedom to do that without the social stigma being like, how can you just discard someone after 2 years, much more easily on your side, which means that we see essentially more like Leonardo DiCaprio behavior of switching women every 2 or 5 years. But the thing is, oftentimes the women in which these bad people prey upon are people who are financially dependent, who become single mothers when they're pregnant during the time they were a family, and they don't get any support after this contract is ended. And again, they do not have any leverage to secure enough information. Sure.
Yeah, divorces and sugar babies in the liberal world will happen on our side of the house as well on both sides, right? This event uniquely unlocks the benefits where it is developing world and women cannot escape the marriage. Explain how you help those women on your side.
I'm saying that you can still not escape this negotiation contract, because how do you have the leverage to sever the contract or renew it in your accord when the other person who has more power and resources have significant more ability to counter evidences that go to their favor as opposed to your own? Finally, this leads to just horrible quality of relationships. We think that relationships should be based on trust. The idea that you and I are not based on a contract, but are based on love. You are going to take care of me at my most vulnerable state is the kind of level of trust that people have in order to become in relationship with each other. However, now the type of relationship becomes much more heartless, which means that, when a friend buys me coffee out of obligation, I'm going to feel different sense of feelings to them as opposed to a friend who bought me coffee because they felt really bad for me. They really wanted to cheer me up. That is why essentially having a contract is far more heartless. But this doesn't just affect the quality of relationship to be a little bit more mechanical, but it also affects the children who are born within this family. We think that children are far more affected because in some families, the children are only staying with the parent that they were born with for 4 years, if the contract was only 4 years, whereas other children are staying with them for 20 or 30 years, which means that the longevity of the time in which children get time with both of their parents is also severely switching between what contract you try, which means that essentially protection upon children is also something that does not happen on their side. We think that this is just going to lead to a massive dystopia. Proud to oppose.
I think it's really for the fans speech. Extending the DBM.
Firstly, on the nature of contracts, secondly, on trust and separation, and thirdly, on helping the most vulnerable women in this debate. Firstly, on the nature of the contract, we think there are 4 layers to this. First, there is no incentive to be so unreasonable when the contract is being drafted, because you have the threat of scaring the other person. You literally do not want to be so overtly aggressive, because the other person will still just not understand where is this coming from, and they'll have a massive tendency to then leave. If that is the case, then this contract will never be signed. So in the vast majority of instances, you have natural incentives to be very cordial, be very negotiable, and communicate a lot before you sign this. But secondly, we think if it is true that this kind of abuse exists, we think there will be widespread messaging about this, because everyone needs to be wary of this. So even if I bring my girlfriend of 10 years to my mom, she will whisper into my ear that this is what has happened throughout society, sign a 2-year contract and keep renewing it. So even if it is true that whatever they are saying in terms of slavery or whatever world they have cooked up, we think then the norm changes to multiple small term contracts, which is still okay at any given, which still minimizes the kind of harm that they're talking about. But the last thing is, and this is the most obvious thing, you cannot subject anyone to fucking slavery. The kind of natural separations exist on both sides of the house. This is an N+1. So depending on the version of debate you want to believe, but we have rebutted both. If this is a world where you have to respect the time-bound constraints regardless of anything, that is the end-all be-all, we have explained to you why the norm will shift to multiple short-term contracts, which are way more easy to navigate, which are way more easy to get out of because the expiry date is nearing. But in vast majority of instances, the more rational version of the debate is that natural divorce still exists. This is just a social messaging debate of where the perception or the narrative around it changes massively. Cool. The second thing around contracts is the ability to manipulate contracts is symmetric on both sides. You can use a private investigator to spy on your wife and take her medical records or phone records out even now. We don't think that this uniquely exists on your side of the house, and even if the extent is more, I don't see how it is significant in this now. Cool. This takes out the contracts bit. Secondly, on where, what is the problem? The problem is the social shaming of women powered by three key narratives. Firstly, religion. Scriptures often mention that a woman's decisions are deferred to the man upon union. That means for a woman to think of leaving is blasphemous. Religion is often a very huge part of people's lives in everyday scenario, so they fear of committing this blasphemy and hence they are fearful of speaking out because now they'll be seen as a communal villain and they'll be seen as people who don't have values growing up. But secondly, patriarchy. The idea is that men were hard at work, so the onus is on a woman to keep the marriage happy, to look after the kids, to cook nutritious food for all. So if a marriage breaks down, it will be seen as the responsibility of the woman and not the man because he was at work hard, going ahead and providing for the family at any given point of time. So in vast majority, vast majority of instances, this is why slut shaming happens when women try to leave marriages in rural India, because it is seen that this woman must have found another man to provide for her family, and that's why she made the bold decision to leave. But the last thing is just social shaming, right? We think everyone in India, in vast majority of instances, people suffer with this, and when someone cops out, you are jealous of them, and you say that this woman could not keep up with the challenge, maybe she was not as iron-willed or did not have the strong kind of resolve. So there is just internalized misogyny, which makes women fucking shame each other and makes matters worse than ever. What changes on our side of the house? What changes is that there is a overwhelming narrative since the creation of time, creation of Adam and Eve, that you can exist as separate unions. That a relationship does not cross into the afterlife and then the next birth that you take. That everything is finite and comes to an end. That is why the social messaging is that this is something that is finite and it was meant to be, so I can question it. It is no longer as blasphemous. Patriarchy is no longer as overwhelming because things were meant to end at any given point of time. So this person, so it's something that constantly evolves. The signaling is that relationships evolve, and that is why you're forced to reflect upon them. Why is this good? A, it helps women in rural areas who are extremely religious pockets just to go ahead and exit these bad things. But secondly, in the vast majority of instances, support structures will be created for them because they will just now be more individualistic, right? If I know that a relationship is a temporary concept, I won't derive my primary source of happiness from that. So the kind of life that I build for myself will be much more good in terms of just being hedged. So I spend more time in terms of pursuing my career goals. I spend more time in pursuing my habits or hobbies in terms of building a friends connection and things like that. So even if the exit, even if separation happens frequently, we think there are support structures that you build up yourself in order to just preempt these at any given point of time. So in the vast majority of instances, these women in rural areas are who you help. Why is it the most important metric of the round? In the developed world, on both sides, you have divorces. Divorces in the US and Germany are over 50%. It's a common concept. It's in India, it's in Bangladesh, it's in Nepal, it's even in Philippines. These countries where in rural areas, the church, the Hindu temples have a very strong hold on women, and this is the only way that you allow them to opt out. The second thing that I want to prove here is even if separation becomes the norm, why are people more happy? First, the interim period where you forcefully try to make things is often bad because of two reasons. A, in vast majority of instances, you suck it up and stay quiet because you have tried to make things work and you don't want to be the worst one who's ending things. So this means that you often fight frequently. Note the implications of this are to be borne by the people around you. Imagine a couple who fights frequently and imagine the life of that child growing up. Now imagine on the comparative where sure, his father left 5 years into the marriage, but that saved the kid 10 more years of grief where he came home to flunging, plates being flung at each other, people shouting the choicest of abuses and things like that. That kind of upbringing is something that's far better on our side of the house for the external stakeholders.
So on your world, hypothetically, do religions still exist? Confucianist society still exists? Conservatism still exists?
It exists. It's about a comparative. Right now there are 5 comparators which want to fuck vulnerable women 10 feet into the ground. Now you have a counter narrative which brings them 2 feet up in the ground. That's the comparative debate. Cool. The second thing then is that the period of even if when separations happen, that's good because it allows you to conceptualize an alternate reality that you only dream of. It's a period of distance which allows you to imagine life without this partner. Now you can see with a much clearer head if you actually want to live with this person or not. In the vast majority of instances, it will also be normalized to go ahead and try and give this a second chance if that is what they want to claim. So either you it's easier to just go ahead and go with other people, as Sharon explained, 45-year-old men and women, or in vast majority of instances, you can just go ahead and have other people around you. But the last thing I want to just talk about is trust, right? We think trust is something that you have a natural incentive to build on both sides of the house. That's true for two reasons. A, man is a social animal, so the way to fraternize, the way to grow in society is to be able to trust other people, what they do, what they have in mind for you. But the second thing is that in the vast majority of instances, you give people the benefit of the doubt. So the good interactions are something you want to positively seek on both sides because it induces dopamine. It is the bad interactions that you're protected against uniquely that wins this debate.
Alright, everybody?
Right.
Yes, hypothetically it's possible. Hypothetically it's possible for me to have a divorce. Hypothetically it's possible for anybody to have a divorce. But the reason is, in reality, if those other narratives exist, I'm not sure what the tipping point is. Why is it suddenly people have one semblance of justification just because liberal nations do this? Why suddenly developing nations are able to go through all the historical legacies of Confucianist societies, the idea of family values matters most, means that people are unlikely to take this chance in the first place. That's the first level of mitigation. But secondly, even if I were to buy this, I'm curious genuinely as to how this is possible for women who don't have financial dependency. Notice their argument here was to say, well, maybe they're preparing more. How? What do they just find more jobs where women systematically are unable to participate in the job market in the developing nation? I think if you want to frame this in a developing context where there's so much hatred against these people from able to leave, I think what that means is that there's plethora of reasons, as other reasons to why these people cannot leave. I'll just add one more. Probably the male figures, the people who have power, will likely want you to stay. This is where Clara's engagement comes in clearly, because what happens on your side is people are going to leverage the things that within the relationship to necessarily force you to not sign or force you to stay. What does this look like? The fact that they have custodian and they can prove that you're a bad mother and therefore you're not going to have ability to meet your child. The fact that in splitting assets, they're going to say that you were vengeful or they were spiteful, and then therefore you should not have any ability to get any of the money that even you made by saying that those money should go to the child. Notice that these kinds of things oftentimes happen, particularly in court, but particularly in the end of the relationship, because here's where game theory mechanism kicks in, and here's where they don't engage. This happens in three unique ways that we think is quite important. First is where the subtle clues and hinges from your partner become far more dangerous. This is when game theory kicks in, because even if you want to stay insofar as you believe your partner are going to leave, this is when you have to do decision making calculus of how my partner is going to justify leaving and what is the process in which I'm going to do things like splitting custody and splitting assets. This is when Clara's mechanism again kicks in to say that probably partners are going to engage in more predatory behavior or explicitly exploitative behavior by recording their partners during their weakest moments or trying to actively aggregate their partners so they're able to prove that during courts of why you want to justify leaving. But we also think that this also happens in an individual level within normal relationships as well. And this is crucially where my extension comes in to prove to you why overall we have far worse relationships on your side. The premise and the thesis of this argument is really simple. If you know for a fact that there is a countdown that means that the relationship is going going to end, or on their side they're saying short-term relationships are fine, most likely you have far less engagement and investment in that relationship in the first place, because you're less likely and less willing to actually invest in a relationship that you believe is going to fail, or you believe that your partner is no longer caring for. The reason why this is crucially important is because people are not as rational and as objective as they can see, where they have a spreadsheet of what the ultimate metric of whether or not I'm going to stay are. What most likely it means is that this particular narrative is likely to activate during the worst times possible, when you particularly had a bad fight or are particularly bored with your partner. This is when the game theory calculus comes in. This is where your ability to do things that are coercive to your partner kicks in. The reason why this is bad is because this is something that you objectively cannot hinder or try to fight back against. This happens from an intuitive and implicit bias way that is ultimately going to make these relationships worse, but it also happens in the efforts and the demotivation you feel when given in a relationship, where you feel like even if I'm investing, my partner is not going to invest, therefore I feel like my partner has too much power over me, therefore I'm less engaged with the party. But then secondly, this is far worse for the children, generally because children are going to grow up in a society where relationships are far less stable. Notice their argument about parents wanting to leave for job opportunities or whatnot already exists on our side and already exists on their side, and it's not going to change. The unique delta that changes is that children now have two visceral reactions, have two visceral visual reactions and examples of what this is going to, the way in this harms them. One is that they have a countdown that says their parents might split. They're constantly looking at their parents to see whether or not they're angry or happy, or one particular part was more impactful. The reason why this particular argument is quite important is because children are not as objective as adults. They're likely to interpret this in the worst ways possible. That is massive harm you're doing on children. But secondly, as I said, the game theory and the suspicion, the incentivization of these predatory behaviors likely affect children far more worsely, in the sense that these children are going to look at these subtle clues and be far more disengaged. It means that on our side, we have far less relationships if these children do not see relationships as worthy in the first place. But then fourthly, children are just subjugated to these things because children are going to be used against each other. While mother wants the children to stay with them, means that the mother is going to be like, your father is evil, your father is cheating or whatever, and stay with me after this relationship ends. Those kinds of action happens on both parents, where both parents care about the child but wants to stay with the child but not with the other partner. That is what they have to deal with. Why is on our side this is going to be better on our side? Better. First is the really simple mechanism of correcting mechanism that exists on our side. There's three reasons why this is possible. The difference is that when you are forced to stay, people don't just be like, ah, fuck, I guess I'll figure it out. They are angry, they want change, and they ask for accountability. What does this look like? This social stigma and pressure does not happen in a vacuum. It happens when people have political power, when people are able to speak up. We also think capitalism fundamentally helps these people, because capitalism doesn't care about sexism or gender or whatever the fuck. They only care about labor force. Insofar as this is true, the mechanism in which females are able to find free themselves from financial dependency is by getting a job, because capitalist market wants females in the job as well, because more labor is great. But secondly, social movements and feminist movements still exist on our side. We don't see why they cannot be the preface or the what is it called, like the social movement that are able to fight for these people. Notice that these self-correcting mechanisms specifically exist on our side to a larger degree, because there's a larger demand, because they believe that there is no way for these females to escape. No. So the reason why they can't escape on our side is obviously because the narrative exists, the stigma exists, which means people understand intuitively when the social movement says we need to create protections. They're like, oh yeah, probably because I can't leave. The thing that they have to suggest is that on liberal societies, or the people who have most power, who do not understand the conservative, really Confucianist society, when they say we need to protect females from being actually able to sign a contract that says they can leave, they're going to be like, why? We already have a contract, why can't you just leave? They might not understand, and that little nuance difference is ultimately why they're going to lose this debate. But then the final thing I'll explain to you is why, even if none of these things are true, like the ultimate social stigma actually does matter in terms of the happiness overall. Like, again, back to the premise, right? If you're going to invest more in a relationship, it's far more likely that your relationship is actually going to succeed, because it's now no longer going to be things like, oh, subtle things that make you feel doubt to your partner is ones that you make that justifies the reaction for you wanting to leave. It's the opposite. The subtle things are understandable, forgivable, make sense, and you want to understand why your partner did this. But you also want to keep this relationship and you stay on to the relationship, sure, maybe because of the stigma, but because of the understanding that these are probably momentary reactions. They're probably enough explanation that you can do in the long term. This doesn't happen on your side because of the, again, game theory, but because of uniquely of the fact that these people just generally have less social stigma to stay, which means they don't feel the investment is worth it.
And the speaker for the speech, calling on the government work to end government obstructed. Here.
finality?
They say children suffer because there's an impending countdown and children always feel bad about like your parents are about to separate. I would first say this is mitigation that I think not every couple in the world has a child. Like I think in most liberal democracies, the idea of having a child is reducing massively. It's mostly in developing nations. That's why you see China and India have huge populations. But let's assume this is mitigation, which it is. Let's talk about the more real engagement with this case. I think children suffer much more on their side of the house when they see their parents fighting every day to no end. And this is crucial panel in developing nations where there is not an ability for women as per their own characterization to escape this particular marriage or this relationship because they don't have the financial capacity, the legal backing to file those divorce cases and get out of this. This is precisely the problem because what happens when a child sees their parents fighting every day? They don't actually just say that, oh, my life is so bad. They actually internalize the fact that it's them who could be blamed for their parents fighting. They internalize the blame for themselves that probably I am not doing enough as a child to help my parents resolve this particular battle because you take the responsibility of two people fighting, two people who you love and who you know love each other. Those kind of things, something that you take on yourself and that accountability sticks with you for life. That's what causes you to have trauma in your entire life. I think that particular fighting that your parents are not sleeping in the same room is what hurts you so much more than at least them having the ability to honor the relationship and at least having that end which you can see. So the countdown is okay because if the parents love each other so much, they will just not renew the contract. They'll just not separate. I don't understand why every parent has to separate because the countdown can just be like a formality where you sign a piece of paper, you move on. And this is exactly what happens, right? It's those abusive relationship where the debate really unlocks. I don't think they ever engage why those children are better off or why those women have the ability to escape. Secondly, social movements change and they don't do enough. But let's really see the genesis of the argument. So they want to create a problem first where women don't have the ability to escape. They're facing their domestic violence in their households, and then they want social movements to go and solve the problem by creating self-marketing mechanisms. How does that really work? Because those movements do not percolate in those areas where the real problems really lie. So the protection never come about to these women. On our side of the house, at least you have the ability to negotiate. Even if these negotiations are completely skewed because we don't have the financial capacity, I think explain to you why negotiations on our side are one better. But even if this is not the case, at least the platform in and of itself is good. I won't explain this. But let's first explain why negotiations work. There are three reasons we gave down the bench. No engagement. One, I think you will just not sign the contract, right? If the negotiations is, you can just scare the other person. The threat perception that you will leave the other individual, which makes even men go ahead and tone down the kind of aggression that they have because they know the other person can just leave and because there's no stigma associated with them leaving. Because right now in developing countries, men know that the women will face stigma. No one wants to marry someone who has divorced. This is exactly what gives them the power that no matter what I do, this person cannot leave. This person cannot escape. This is the problem that they don't understand. On our side, you will just not sign, so the threat perception it ensures that you are not that big of an asshole. Secondly, it's at least visibility of issues. The platform in the discussion in of itself is great. Even if it means that it comes to a skewed outcome, even if you renew the contract with like say the same kind of conditions that were there earlier, at least you discuss and both parties recognize what the issue is. Like I said, this platforming is great for things like self-introspection and at least realizing what the problem is. But lastly, you have options. It's a THP world, which means that in most cases, and he told you from first speech onwards, reparation becomes normal. The kind of options that open up for you are also normal. So a 45-year-old can also find like new relationships and find new contracts. Those kind of options in the market is what goes ahead and gives you the confidence that I can move a relationship and find someone else. Which means that also acts as a threat for the other person to not be an asshole to you because they know that you have multiple other options. That again means that for self-preservation instinct, if you want to hold on a relationship, you'll not be an asshole. That's why negotiations will work. But even if they do not, I think it's largely uncomparative on their side of the house. Because like I said, like in developing nations, the negotiations don't really have to work considering that women have equal capacity. On our side of the house, the debate really unlocks in developing nations where women do not have the capacity. So they have to explain to us why negotiations end up working on their side. We give you a case for why this is true on our side. Right? It's very simple. That when you realize that you can live a life and separation is not part of life and it's okay for us to have impermanence in relationship and religions are not just overbounding in nature, you tend to plan yourself to ensure that you will get out of the relationship at some point. That means you opt into things like jobs. The woman doesn't sacrifice every part of their life because they just believe that the husband is going to be with me and be a nice husband forever, right? So you go ahead and plan for those things. So you don't end up quitting this job. You still keep on building a financial capacity. You have institutions that come up. And this is where I want to be very clear on how the capacity of women is built. One, the normalization separation means that you just have, like I said, more options, but independent planning means that you don't sacrifice the kind of opportunity cost that you take. But thirdly, you have things like pro bono lawyers, you have systems that will build in a new world, right? So the systems will be built which can go ahead, like things like contract centers or fast track contract courts. You will have like institutions which help you separate out the inheritance and the assets. Those kind of things will exist in this new world. Like there's reasonable fiat that we claim on our side of the house to say that you will have those issues catered to. They are pointing out logistical problems instead of beginning with the actual case. I think that's just literally out of the debate. But secondly, I want to be very clear on how this debate functions. On our side of the house, you still have natural separations. You want to break up with your boyfriend, it's completely fine. If you want to have divorce in the Western democracy, it's also fine. What we uniquely give is that every 10 years or every some number of years, you still have to mandatorily renegotiate. So it's N+1 benefits that we claim on our side of the house. This +1 is so crucial for most developing nations because in those areas, it's impossible to escape the relationship. That's where the debate really unlocks, and all they say is there's a bunch of mitigation to say that it won't work out in the same way. I'm going to deal with why insecurity and bad relationships is okay. Before that, I'll take you.
So like, I'm really confused, right? So on your side, you're saying that people can suddenly leave, they can have financial capacity because they can get a job. Where do they get a job? Well, like society doesn't just give people out jobs.
Society doesn't give people out jobs, but when women, they were working in a job, in most religious countries, in most conservative countries, they are forced to give up their jobs because they are expected to stay in the household, do child rearing, take care of the house, and they're okay with this giving up this job. You know why? Because they feel that the man is going to be permanently with them to support them financially and support them when they need it. This is what the impermanence does on our side. It forces you to think beyond the kind of permanence or the false sense of security that the man provides you. Even if you're on their side, when the relationship turns abusive, there's no ability for you to opt out. On our side, you plan for the future because you know that opt out is something that's or normal, that's still better on our side. But why is the insecurity that relationships will have, and this is the best case they have, matters less than the potential to escape abusive relationship? One, we benefit the most vulnerable actors which cause the most intense harm of them, right? Because insecurity is a human function. Some people have more of it, some people have less of it. But the harm is manufactured onto these women by patriarchy and misogyny. So you want to escape this particular harm, there's no escape to this, whereas insecurity is something that people can escape out of because they just go to therapy. Like secondly, insecurity has a possible escape, like I said. You can talk, negotiate with people, but this harm has no escape because police systems don't work in those areas. NGOs don't want to touch this particular case. Lawyers don't want to take up this case because society is so fucked and there's power asymmetry. So the harm is so massive that it's impossible to escape this harm. Insecurity is not that big of a harm even if it's still present. But lastly, insecurity on our side is rather better visible because on their side insecurity gets masked out. You still are insecure but don't show it. On our side you negotiate when this period ends. That means that you can negotiate and talk and resolve the insecurity much better on our side of the house. For that reason, we have the most vulnerable actor, and I don't think they have a comparative for all those reasons. Gov.
Thanks to give your fan speech and the outgoing constructives and the constructives debate as a whole. Output here.
So I will observe this debate in three fronts. So A, I will talk about the abusive relationships that they talk about. Two, I'll talk about normal relationships and who improves the quantity of happiness of the normal relationships. That was the point that we were continuously pushing for, that constitutes the majority of the relationship they never engage for. And then three, talk about the children, which are also the more important stakeholders inside this debate. A, talking about abusive relationships. So their push is that A, oh, you have a paper to sign with, so it is better. And B, there will be better narratives for individuals. So the logical leap that is massive inside government is the opposition government is that they have the same malicious intents and same patriarchal people and same institutions like church that have the same intents, but just the narrative change and they magically solve the problem. More realistic scenarios is that they will make the narrative look like women that do not renew the relationship contract is shameful. They will shame people that sign contracts that are less than 20 years. They will call those kind of people harmful because maybe they do not breed and reproduce for the future society if they are not signing for 5 years. Maybe if you don't renew your relationship, you are not being responsible for your child, you are not being responsible for your society. We don't necessarily say why the conservative nations that they are so preferring to talk about will suddenly have a large narrative shift. We believe that this can be even worse because if the narrative is something like, oh, we should sign for 20 years or else you are unproductive people, there are a minimum upon how much you should stay on these kind of relationship. A lot of cases, this in itself even more ditches the possibility of the divorce inside the relationship. And the reason why we flip this and say that this is even worse is that because this drastically decreases things like marriage counseling and social movements, that discuss about the happiness within the relationship, because you no longer believe that pursuing happiness within the relationship is more important, but just escaping the relationship is a solution for like an unhappy relationship. Not everybody has that choice. There are women that has no choice but to stay inside your relationship. A lot of cases, things like social movement and marriage counseling are helping and boosting happiness and security for those people inside the relationship. In their world, there are no need for that. You can just escape that contract. You can just get over 5 years, even in their best case. And such people that are feeling insecurity but do not have a choice are the people that are directly harmed inside their society. Two, they're a very naive mechanism that they have a paper, so this is a contract. You cannot just sign it. We say that this in itself is also very unintuitive at the get-go. We'll just simply flip this and say that you, like Shinny already told you, there are issues like custody and finance that you need to deal with after this particular relationship ends. We say that they says that there will be way more frequent and there will be way more amounts of like custody and finance issues and transition that you need to deal with. The stronger patriarchal men that have more resources will tell the woman and like intimidate the woman that if you do not unite and sound that relationship, I will take your money, I will take your custody, I will take your children out from you, and if you don't sign it, you will live the most miserable life at all. Like we say that the fact that there's options in the market, it's not that you are having those options always available. These people will make and persuade and indoctrinate the woman just as they do in the status quo, like those kind of people inside the option in the market. What we have as a tipping point and change inside the status quo is Clara and Shinny continuously told you they are institutional support to maintain the happiness within the relationship. We say that ultimately they neglect the possibility of the relationship being continued and just moving on without any solvency upon why those kind of narrative is helping them. But moreover, I think that the second and the biggest part of the debate is about the most like common relationships. Who boosts more happiness and who feel more happy inside the relationship? Because the biggest push that opposition has is that generally relationship has much less fulfillment, much less trust upon your partner, much less love into the partner. We say that this in itself is intuitive from the beginning, but let me explain a bit more. Because I think what continuously we try to explain to you is the person that get advantage at the end of one relationship is people who have malicious intents. People who start and tend to change your apartment's like owner, like undercover from your partner. People that are leaking your medical records that you send for the partner and then winning those kind of custody right, winning those kind of finance right, like recording your opponent and saying that that person is like an irresponsible parent. Those people are the people that will win the custody and finance fight. And because like they say in their whip speech, there will be much more institutions that will be caring about this custody right every time after this relationship is ending. We say that obviously even if most people have good intents in the beginning, if it is the social narrative and practice that people that are betraying the other person or people that are having a comparatively less love against and less trust against other people, or the people that are drowning and reaping benefits from this quickly transiting relationship, those will be the individuals and those will be the social norm in maintaining the relationships. But secondly, Clara already told you about a lot of cases why loving the partner and sticking inside a relationship with 10 years and 20 years is something that is remotely fulfilling for both the partners that is existing in your relationships. Why having an emotional bond with your parents and why having your emotional bond with your partner and your children is something that is one of the most fulfilling experiences individuals have, and that is why people opt into marrying another person despite all the burdens that you need to take. What you're saying is that you will just move over 4 to 5 years after other because I need to go to San Francisco and you're not. A lot of cases people will not feel the happiness and fulfillment that is enough, something that people reap from our society, while in their society this is just a contract and you're just living with your partner for 4 years and moving into the next person. And we will also move on to talk about the children, but before that, yeah.
People with high amounts of bond and love will not change on either side of the house. You will just sign the contract and move on. It's a formality. Let's talk about a median relationship. In a median relationship, at least on our side, you platform the issues, you're forced to talk. On their side, you just mask the issues, you never talk about your insecurities, never talk about your issues.
Okay, like I said, insecure relationship that is very vicious and malicious is not solved in your side. We say that the narrative could be even more exacerbated inside the taste that is conservative and more abusive. So we say that the more important stakeholders, we talked about why we solve it better though, but we believe that if that is symmetric, the most important stakeholders is what is the general happiness level altered in the society that you have or in the society that we have. We're saying that generally your overall relationships that are not abusive, so therefore you're not fighting at the get-go, feel much less happiness because you have a partner and because you have a person that you can trust. Thirdly, about children, the only counterpush from government, from our analyses upon why your children is just ditched after 3 years, is that, oh, like it is better than your parents fighting. Like we said, we're not only talking about abusive relationships. What we are saying is that the quantity of children that will be left out from the relationship will drastically increase in their world. Everyone will believe that just living in 5 years is something that's a completely natural thing. Everyone will believe that ditching your children after like 3 years is something that is like a cool woman, a cool man is doing, even in their best case. We say that in a lot of cases, your children inside your world are not ditched by people that are already fighting, but people that would live a happy life inside your family if the world was like the status quo. We say that in a lot of cases, the reason why children are especially important is because they do not have a choice, like those kind of people imply. None of the narratives that they talk about, or none of the like social goods that they imply, are in the mind of the children. These people are the people that do not get education and receive and imply and expose with the interact with the society just like has what their eyes see. We say that those people are the people that you're killing. Last piece of point that they never respond. We say that we also believe that divorce is not always good. There are cases where people like Leonardo DiCaprio is just make everyone pregnant and then just moving on to next relationship. The fact that you are removing stigma from divorces and removing stigma from irresponsible behavior from stronger individuals are also harmful for those kind of vulnerable individuals that you talk about. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for the fine speech and off upper time. Here.
Judge, when you're assessing which side of the world is better, you need to assess which one maximizes the happiness as well as minimizes the harms. The problem on Gov side is that abuse, like their status quo relying on women getting emancipation, women getting more empowerment and freedom to escape, only happens in marriages where the current marriage is currently bad, which is not 100 out of 100. Sure, maybe in developing countries that exists a little more, but let's just assume maximum that is like 50% out of 100 relationships. In those cases, when they have this new motion, now potentially biting all of their positive cases, they're able to opt in after 4 years of marriage. The analysis that we gave on opposition is that negative things happen as a result of this policy being passing, which means that it is not just pertaining to relationships that are already abusive, but even relationships that were currently happy. Now, because you think more in a game theoretic manner, because you know that there is a countdown to the relationship, you have the capacity and the incentive to weed out negative aspects about your partner in low moments when you're like, maybe I should break up with him after this contract ends, right? Which is why majority of relationships, the quality of it decreases. That is why on our side, our harms are maximized, their harms are maximized on their world, and that is why we should not prefer it. Secondly, negotiations happen only when both sides have equal amount of power. We told you that power asymmetry exists. They said, oh, that exists in the status quo, so what's the benefit you have? We're saying that this power asymmetry exists to a greater extent because now every single family is based on this time bound, and every single family has some degree of power asymmetry. And like I said, because rational people think in like, unless you're completely in love and like you're completely going to like be with this person forever, which is like not the case that we're talking about. In the majority of instances, a lot of people who have a little bit less power are far more affected on their side. But secondly, let's move on to the idea of like things being time bound. Even if we buy all of their case and say that women get to escape their marriages, they have support, they have systematic support, they get to talk about it, they have no stigma, they're able to move on. Even if we say that is all true, like chronologically speaking, men who know that these women have now this ability to opt out are not stupid. They know that this woman has a chance to escape, which means that our idea on the game theoretic matter of people preparing beforehand to tie this person's foot back happens chronologically prior to this person escaping on their world, which means that they first of all tried to trap this person into a longer marriage from the get-go. Secondly, at the point at which they think that the woman is going to leave, they try to negotiate a renewal by piling information to prove that you're a better person, by maybe like acquiring more financial statements, etc., or convincing the people around this woman to be like, you should stay with them before the contract ends, and thereby pressurizing this person more intensely at the time of trying to renew the contract. Or it could also mean that if you really think you can't keep this woman anymore, trying to sabotage this woman as much as possible by relying on all the information of this person you had when you're vulnerable to get as much mortgage estate or as much property estate that you got. They just said that pro bono work is going to solve. We don't think that is enough because, again, people who are in power have far more leverage than any pro bono work or NGO work in the status quo. Finally, they talk about how they're more likely to, on our side, people are more likely to invest in long-term relationships. Sure, relationships have ups and downs, but at the least, you try to stick with this person in the long run, or that is the first thing that you resort to before trying to think about, divorcing. Whereas on their side, breaking up is the easier solution than to trying to stick to them in the long run. We're not saying that every relationship is going to be happy perfectly all the time, but at least you try. And in trying and rebuilding your relationship after you have a fight, this is what constitutes the meaning and happiness in the long-term fulfillment. No couple never fights. You fight, but you get back together. But our ability for our unions to get back together and thereby create more sustainable and stable families for our children, and to ensure for our children's happiness as well as our stability, despite ups and downs and bumps in the road, are far more possible. Therefore, we have happier long-term relationships on our side.
Speaker for your final speech. To finally end this debate, I'll gov reply. Here.
They're not engaging with the reimagined world from t equal to 0. When the norm in our world is to have finite contracts, the key narratives in status quo, like religion and patriarchy, that pushes social narratives that place a premium on staying with one person forever, do not exist. When that does not exist, people are not as scared to terminate bad familial relationships. And I explained that in status quo why this system's probably going to be much better. Because I want to note something here. Their negative push is saying that, let's take their absolute best case, that, partners with disproportionate amount of power will force you to sign bad contracts. But I want to be very charitable here. When this person is being an absolute dick, you at least have the choice to move on and sign a different contract, find another person. You have the support system to work with that in our side of the world. In their side of the world, you're stuck married to them. You're stuck being in the same relationship. You're stuck because the societal narrative still exists on their side. They don't do any effort to show why, even when we engage with their best absolute charitable case, why that there's going to be any difference in their side of the world. But then I want you to note, right? On their side, you have to fight the societal stigma, you have to fight a much harder legal battle, you have to fight a much more persuasive of influence, right? Because you're stuck with that if you're stuck with that husband forever, he can obviously check your phone, he can obviously do one of these things. It's like much more worse, because at least in our side you have an exit, you have an option. The 45-year-old woman can go and find another relationship. That is the first thing I said in my first speech. So they're not engaging with the ability for people to leave. This ability to put people to leave is the most important thing. But then let's be more charitable here, because I want you to know. They say that, look, this power asymmetry is bad, and when they do contract and renegotiation, this comes out. I think this coming out initially itself is good, because when this power asymmetry exists for a very long time, when it crystallizes, that's when 10-15 years into the relationship you think your partner is so much more better than you are, they have more financial whatever, all of these things that come out on our side. I think so when you renegotiate, this asymmetry, understanding this asymmetry is good, because the power of the conversation is very, very important, because only when you have these conversations, you platform the issues, you platform the issues that are in the relationship and only happens on their side, you just keep it inside and you keep it together and you probably live a much more horrible life on the side. But let's talk about the lost issues, like missed issues in the round. Because I wanted to know, we think individuals lead a much better relationships on our side. No response to this. Because I say it in two ways in my speech. First, I say as relationships grow, we are able to get relationships that meet the requirement of what I want from the relationship. Maybe 3 years down the line, I am scared to go because I'm scared of Jesus being bad on their side, Jesus and society being calling me a dick and leaving the relationship. But on my side, at least, I'm able to change the relationship, adapt to what relationship I want. But secondly, you have more conversations about what is the relationship you want with the partner you have, which means you're able to evolve the relationship in a way that works for both of you, and that conversation only happens on our side of the world. You don't have that conversation on their side. But more importantly, I think we also prove why individuals are better off on our side of the world. Because the question is fair that, oh, how are these women going to get the jobs? Because I explained from t equal to 0, you're taught to be more individualistic, which means it changes the decision-making calculus in what you choose to do. People in rural India will spend money to send the children to university because that will enable the girl to be more independent. On their side, they will save the money to buy jewels and gifts for a marriage because the idea here is that person will stay with you forever. That's the societal norm, which means you're not preparing to be more individualistic. In our side, you're preparing to be more individualistic. You're taught from a very young age. Your mom and dad, everybody is telling you that you need to be more individualistic. You need to pursue more hobbies. That's comes in the second speech. You need to feel what makes you happy. I think that's when people are able to individually be happy, they're able to get into relationships that are much more suitable for them, and they're going to be more happy. But then last issue, and cleaning it up, right? I think children is a wash. And the reason for this is, in healthy, happy relationship, when people feel like, you know what, I love this person, they're going to renew the contract regardless in any way, shape or form. Which means these children are probably going to be fine. Only when you have a big problem, that's when this contract renewal is going to be a problem. I think it's okay if instead of being in a bad marriage where you see your parents fighting, it's completely okay to get out of the relationship and you're able to feel the thing. And also the children are not going to feel the stigma because that stigma doesn't exist on our side of the world because of the t equal to 0 and the norm not existing. But then last thing, I think people are not idiots to break up over silly, simple issue. They need to be a little bit more charitable. They need to show more work for why people are likely to break up over silly issues. I think people are not likely to break up over silly issues for these reasons.
I think the speaker for the final speech. Thank you everyone for the wonderful debate. Please cross the house. Congratulations for finishing 8 rounds.
And the brothers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the round.
We're gonna come back.
Yes.